So these are our section 3 notes for chapter 5 in biology. We're going to talk about regulating cell division, and on the flip side, what would happen if you don't regulate that cell division. And we're going to talk about cancer and how that occurs. So there are both internal and external factors that regulate cell division. So external factors include physical and chemical signals. We're going to talk about that physical first, then chemical. So physical factors. This next note says that cells stop dividing in a culture dish when they come into contact with other cells. So when I literally have a petri dish with bacteria in it, starting with one bacteria cell, that bacteria cell can divide, right? And then each of those can divide, and each of those can divide, and you keep getting more and more cells. But after a while, when you have a clump of cells, like this clump that I've drawn, those ones that are in the middle stop dividing. They're already surrounded by other cells, right? So when cells are in literal physical contact with other cells, a lot of times they won't divide, right? But if I was to cut a gash through the middle of this clump of cells, right, now cells on the left and on the right are not in contact anymore, so they divide to fill in that gap. Right? Just like your skin cells would divide to fill in a gap when you get a cut. Right? So one of the main factors for cell division is that cell in contact with other cells or not. The ones that are inside of a clump tend to not divide. The ones that are on the outside will. Right? So that's a physical factor to start out. But there are also chemical factors. And so the contact itself was physical. Make sure you understand the difference. Whereas growth factors would be chemical factors. Growth factors include a large group of proteins that stimulate cell division. One of the main things I actually want you to focus on from all of this is that there actually has to be a combination of many different growth factors for a cell to divide. It's not going to respond to just one thing, because then you can ensure that cells divide when they're supposed to be dividing. Right? There's a lot of safety measures in place here so that they don't divide uncontrollably. Right? So growth factors can stimulate that cell division, but those are chemical signals that come from outside the cell. They're external factors again, and they stimulate that cell, tell it to divide. Right? They're produced elsewhere in the body, not by the cell itself. So, again, external factors would include hormones. Right? Hormones are a lot like those growth factors. They're just not proteins necessarily. They're steroids, likely. They're part of that lipid group of macromolecules. But just like those growth factors, they stimulate cell growth. So again, you always want to have more than one signal involved, because that helps control things a little bit better. Right? That way, if one thing's present, the cell doesn't automatically divide. It's only when multiple stimulants are present that it actually does. And that's how you control what kind of cell is also going to divide at the same time, because they would all have different combinations of signals to tell them to divide. Otherwise, your internal factors, once you have those external factors in place, whether they're physical or chemical, it doesn't really matter. Right? That's when you get your internal factors starting to kick into place. And the only thing I really want you to know here for these internal factors are that you have these cyclins and kinases. As soon as your cell is signaled to divide, right, those cyclins activate these kinases that phosphorylate target molecules that ultimately result in cell division. But that doesn't mean anything to us in biology because you haven't taken a biochemistry class. So I don't expect you to know what phosphorylate means. That's not a big deal. Just look for these key words, the cyclins and kinases, and you'll be fine. Right, but then as we enter the next part of these notes, see at the bottom there that not all factors actually cause growth. Right? Some factors can actually cause the death of a cell. So you can tell a cell to divide, but you can also tell it to kill itself, essentially. Right? Apoptosis is a programmed cell death, right? Which is actually a normal thing. Right? The examples that are everyday type examples, right? When you were a fetus, before you were born, you had webbed fingers, you had webbed toes, you even had a tail, right? Well, all of those things through apoptosis disappeared, right? The skin that was connecting your fingers together in between your fingers went through that apoptosis process, and that was part of your everyday development, right? You don't have that now, but you're not supposed to have that now. Whereas if you were a duck and you needed to swim, you might still have that, right? So it depends on the development of that organism, but sometimes this apoptosis helps them gain or lose tissues that are necessary to be lost. So the other one, leaves falling off in the winter. Leaves are only held onto by that stem, and as soon as it gets cold, right, that stimulus causes the cells in that stem to die, go through that apoptosis. And as soon as all those cells die, the leaves fall off. Right? But along with apoptosis, sometimes all it takes is some severe DNA damage to trigger that apoptosis. And you'd be aware of that if you've ever had a severe sunburn. Right? When you get that sunburn, your skin starts to peel after the fact. Right? You cause so much damage to the surface of your skin. Right? Those cells started to die through this apoptosis process. But that's actually an important thing. If they didn't die, those cells with DNA damage could end up harming you. So we wanted them to die, right? We wanted this apoptosis to protect us. Because that's when we jump into the next part of this section. That's when we start talking about cancer. And so cancer is a group of diseases characterized by uncontrolled division. So you have these cells that are dividing over and over and over again. And the problem is they never really do their job. It's caused by DNA damage. And again, DNA damage can trigger apoptosis. So on that last slide, the reason why you have, can't grab the box here, the reason why you need those cells to die after you have that severe sunburn is so you don't end up with skin cancer. Right? It helps protect you from that. So specifically, right, damages to oncogenes, right, and lots of other damage associated with those breaks and, like those checkpoints, the stop signs in G2 that we talked about before, right? You would have to, again, be in a different class to really understand all the different kinds of damages that had to occur to cause cancer, right? So there's multiple things just right away. I have to speed up that cell cycle, and I also have to cut the brakes, right? If it starts dividing uncontrollably, both those things could be a problem. That's just an analogy, right? If you hit the gas in your car, but there were no brakes, there's nothing stopping you. But specifically, at least when I was in college taking classes, they were talking about at least 8 different damages that had to occur to that cell before it would be cancerous. And they're very specific. So it's not actually all that likely for a cell to become cancerous, but it could happen if all these different things come into play. So in terms of what you need to know, just make sure you know that multiple things multiple damages has to occur before you can end up with that cancer. But lots of damage usually means apoptosis. That's going to kill that cell before it can become cancerous. Some of that damage can actually be inherited. So that's why a doctor would ask you about your family history. Right? But we'll talk more about that. You can't actually inherit cancer directly because the original cell that was you would have been cancerous and you would have never developed into a human being. That cell itself would have died. Right? There would have just been a tumor from the get-go. But you can inherit some of the damage, right? So maybe you have one of those 8 things that needs to happen to cause a cancer cell to occur. But you need lots of different damages to get cancer, so no one can be born with cancer. You just might have some of that damage. So we're going to talk about this question later in class. Right? It should actually be clear already because I've explained it, but we'll come to that later. Other cancer terms that we need to know. Cancer cells form in clumps called tumors. Benign tumors remain clustered together, whereas malignant tumors may have cells that metastasize or break away. Right, so understand that one versus the other. Benign is supposed to be the semi-good version. There's no such thing as a good tumor, but at least if it's benign, it's not spreading to the rest of your body. Whereas malignant tumors can actually break away. Those cells end up in your bloodstream, get carried to other places in your body, and that's what makes it worse, right? Malignant forms of cancer are much more dangerous to you because it's spreading to the rest of your body. Again, I already told you that some of the mutations can be inherited, but most of them come from exposure to carcinogens. So those are those substances known to cause cancer, one of which I already talked about. UV light from the sun is dangerous. If you get a sunburn, it can damage the DNA in your cells, and that can actually cause cancer. It could cause skin cancer. So that sunburn's helping you, protecting you, right, when those cells go through apoptosis and die and peel off. Right? But that's not a guarantee. Maybe you damaged it just a little bit. It's actually when you don't get a sunburn that it's a little bit more dangerous, when you don't get that true sunburn, because those cells aren't damaged badly enough to kill themselves, but they may just have that specific damage necessary to cause that cancer. Cancer treatments. There's radiation and chemotherapy. Radiation is targeting tumors directly. You use some source of radiation, but you also focus that radiation to a specific place. So if I'm doing this radiation treatment, I'm going to target tumors directly, trying not to affect surrounding tissues. Right? It's not necessarily the most appropriate term to use in the classroom. I like to think of this as a sniper treatment. Right? I'm going to hit that tumor and only that tumor and kill it. Right? I'm trying to trigger apoptosis in that tumor. I'm going to expose it to so much radiation that it's going to have to kill itself through apoptosis. So it's the sniper treatment for cancer. Whereas chemotherapy, you're using those chemicals that actually go throughout the system. It's a systemic treatment, meaning that every cell in your body is going to be exposed to this. But what we want to target are rapidly actively dividing cells. So most of your cells are unaffected, but there are certain cells that do get affected more than others. So you might be aware of the fact that somebody who's going through chemotherapy loses their hair, right? It turns out remember your skin cells are actually rapidly actively dividing cells, right? They're going to be affected more so by this chemotherapy than other cells in your body. So it's only going to affect cells that are currently dividing or dividing frequently. So chemotherapy affects those cells. Hopefully it's the tumor that you're really hurting, but other cells are like innocent bystanders, right? I like to consider this my shotgun treatment. And it's a systemic treatment for a reason, right? You have a malignant tumor and it's spreading throughout your body. We don't even know where it is right now. So we have to use this chemotherapy to try and kill all those different cells. So again, if you are going to try and kill something with a shotgun, right, you're not actually trying to be very precise. You just need to have that spread of BBs that can hit that target that you want to hit, right? So it's a little bit less precise. You are going to affect other cells that are not cancerous, but usually it's those cells that are dividing rapidly, like your skin cells. So you might lose your hair, or like your stomach lining. So you're going to feel nauseous, right? You're going to end up having a lot of intestinal issues, right? So those unfortunate symptoms that come with that chemotherapy are just a byproduct of not really knowing what you're trying to attack, not knowing what you're trying to kill. You don't know where that cancer is. So you're just using that shotgun treatment, that systemic treatment. But again, last note on here, most of what we know about the cell cycle actually comes from research of cancer cells in the lab. So without cancer, we wouldn't even care about a lot of this stuff we're learning about, right? We want to know how the cell controls and regulates division so that we can prevent cancer from happening. All right, so that should be good for notes.